If You Don't Want My Opinion, Episode 20, Apologizing 101, by Carl Marking. Everyone in a two-person relationship is really in a three-way. There's you, the other person, and the relationship itself. Regardless of whether the relationship is professional, romantic, or friendly, it's unrealistic to expect you will never hurt another person's feelings, never disappoint them, or never be hurt or disappointed by them. Enter apologies. I apologize to someone about something almost daily. A friend, my husband, strangers in a store, even the cat who's been plotting my death since the day we rescued her from the freezing cold 8 years ago this winter. Apologies are inevitable and an integral part of a healthy relationship. They can be as simple as, "I'm sorry I forgot to get the thing you asked for at the store. I'll write it down next time. Do you want me to go back and get it?" They can also be quite complex. The bigger the offense, the deeper the wound, and an apology can become harder to navigate successfully. Wouldn't it be great if we could just slap a Band-Aid over a hurt inflicted on or by someone and move forward like it never happened? Some try to do just that. They ignore the wound and eventually find themselves either in an emotional cul-de-sac or with one less connection in their life because the relationship faded away. We simply can't escape making an apology when we've wronged someone, any more than we can bandage a wound without cleaning it first, if we expect either to properly heal. As with cleaning a physical wound, there are steps to follow for cleaning an emotional wound. Apologizing is the process of revisiting some action that caused someone to be hurt and doing our best to repair the damage we inflicted. Whether we meant to hurt the other person is completely irrelevant. It's all about intention versus impact. Speaking in public, asking for help, and saying the words "I'm sorry" seem to be three of the hardest things for people to do. Some say they'd rather die than speak in public, most likely because they fear ridicule. Ditto asking for help. I believe many feel the same way about saying they're sorry to someone. People too often equate apologizing to someone as losing some fight, some imaginary battle that exists only in their own mind. Others view apologizing to someone as a generalized form of weakness. To apologize is to be weak. I see it all the time. People caught in the thinking that apologies are some one-up, one-down scenario. To me, they are at least net neutral and usually win-win. The common thread through each of these acts that causes people such distress, public speaking, asking for help, and apologizing, is they each require us to make ourselves vulnerable. And we generally are not comfortable being vulnerable to or with someone. And therein lies the rub. Somehow in our culture we have equated vulnerability to making ourselves subordinate to someone, to being or appearing to be weak. Again, the one-up, one-down thinking. In reality, truly being able to be vulnerable requires strength and courage. In order to be vulnerable, we must first be secure in our self-identity and self-worth. When we know who we are, when we understand what we're about at our core, when we are clear in our motivations while in the act of being vulnerable, when we are not seeking validation from the other person as a reward for our vulnerability, then our vulnerability is coming from a place of self-awareness, self-respect, and empathy, all of which makes our act of vulnerability an act of strength, conviction, and courage. Being vulnerable is easier when we do have a trusting relationship with the other person, but that's a luxury we don't always have. With or without that trust, we can still be vulnerable, and if we've wronged someone, and we care about the relationship, then we owe them an apology, like it or not. We are taught how to speak in public. We are told there's no shame in asking for help, though people do often shame us when we do so. We are not, however, typically taught how to apologize, and we're certainly not taught about the inherent strength in vulnerability. Our public speaking education begins as early as elementary school and continues through high school and college if we go. It comes in the form of show and tell, giving reports, reading the section of scripture where we worship, taking part in a debate, and through the arts. The arts equivalent of public speaking would be performing a music solo, delivering a line or monologue in a play, or submitting our work for an art show. As for public speaking, we're taught about topic sentences, paragraph structure, and building our case. We're taught about enunciation, pronunciation, word choice, tone, brevity, posture, breathing, and even how to make a closing argument or invite a call to action. But who teaches us how to navigate the mechanics of an apology? I suppose if we were lucky, we saw it modeled at home growing up. I don't know anyone who was that lucky. I was taught as a child to say, "I'm sorry," when I did something wrong, and sometimes even when I didn't. Many of us were. But I wasn't taught anything beyond that. Some of us were lucky enough to figure out how to manage apologies as we went through life. Others may never figure it out, and are left wondering why people have added distance to a relationship, or left the relationship entirely, often without explanation. Life taught me the need for and value in apologizing. I did okay on my own, all things considered, but as I grew older and my relationships with other people became more nuanced and complex, so did the apologies. Eventually, I went looking for a structure to successfully offer them. As we enter the holidays, I think apologies, whether giving or getting one, may be a theme this year. I'm going to walk through the framework I use based on things I've read, conflict resolution training I've had, and my 6 figures worth of therapy over the last 30 years. At its core, an apology is the end result of successfully revisiting and repairing a wound. The wound that needs repairing, that needs the apology, began with some conflict. That conflict could be based on some action we took or some words we said that hurt the other person. It could also be something we didn't do or didn't say. We forgot our anniversary. We promised to attend something or do something, and we didn't. The kicker is that we may not be aware the conflict even happened. We're blissfully unaware of the whole thing. If we're lucky, the conflict is clearly laid out before us in the form of, "You did that, and I feel this." Some may not find that particularly lucky, being called out for something we did, but I find those situations much easier to navigate and resolve. I find it easier to be told I've done something to upset someone because then I clearly know what happened. I'm also comfortable with conflict. I didn't used to be, but life and work provided me with a lot of experience with it. I did an online search to try and find a single word to describe someone who is comfortable with conflict, and laughed out loud at the AI response I was provided. Quote, "A person comfortable with conflict is called confrontational. Other words include belligerent, combative, quarrelsome, or contrarian." End quote. People who are those things definitely sow conflict, but to be comfortable with conflict is none of those things. To be comfortable with conflict means you don't shrink away from it. You are comfortable enough in your position and your skin that you don't find conflict inherently threatening. It doesn't trigger your fight or flight response. It doesn't immediately hijack your emotional state. For me, being comfortable with conflict means that when I'm made aware of the existence of some conflict, I quickly lean in to understand what is happening. We do this all the time at work with stakeholders and colleagues. It's the core of customer service and relationship management. I think the AI that served that result to me may have some issues with conflict, but I don't. Which I think puts me in a small subset of most people. Because so many people aren't comfortable with conflict, and may find it difficult to say, "You did that and I feel this," I'm going to focus on the distance that appears between two people when one of them is feeling wounded, and the other person notices the distance, but doesn't know why it's there. You know that little jolt of electricity you get when you make eye contact with someone? It's subtle, but you know it when you feel it. Equally subtle is that distance we feel when someone is pulled away. It is often our first clue that we've hurt someone. They've pulled back to process the hurt or protect themselves. This can manifest itself in many different ways. Calls from the other person are suddenly less frequent, and our calls to them go unanswered or unreturned. Texts have fallen off. Engagement on socials is drying up. Emails are shorter, less frequent, or unanswered. However the distance manifests itself, we feel the shift. And regardless of why the distance came into the relationship, if we want it repaired, there's work to do. Spoiler alert, avoidance is not part of that work. I understand it's the path of least resistance, but in the long run it's exhausting, disingenuous, and makes things worse, which doesn't serve our best interests. We can spend copious amounts of energy and time winding ourselves up over the change, wondering what we did that caused the other person to react whichever way they are reacting. We may also feel inclined to dismiss their change in behavior with a, "what's their problem?" mindset. But if we want to understand and repair whatever it is that's causing the distance in the fastest, easiest, least exhausting way, just ask the other person if something is wrong. If you just thought, well, of course, you're probably comfortable with conflict, and I bet you're probably also an experienced apologizer. For you, being vulnerable, reaching out, and asking what's wrong feels natural and straightforward. If your reaction at the thought of reaching out to someone to ask if something is wrong was, "I'd rather die," you're most likely uncomfortable with both conflict and being vulnerable. There's no shame in it. Vulnerability can absolutely make us feel less than, insecure, or downright powerless. But being vulnerable is really a skill set, and with practice comes success, and with success comes comfort. If you listen to my podcast regularly, it will be of no surprise to you that I learned nothing from my family of origin about being vulnerable or comfortable with conflict. In fact, I was absolutely conflict averse. If I opened my mouth to stand up for myself, more often than not, my throat would close and I could barely speak. I had to figure it out on my own, from life, from the people around me, and in therapy. One day in my early 20s, while working for the community theater in my hometown, a small miracle happened. One of the women who ran it, someone I deeply respected and admired, accused me of making a costly mistake in front of my coworkers. When I tried my best to explain I hadn't done what she was accusing me of, she wouldn't hear it and continued to dress me down in front of everyone. I was sick about it the rest of the day and through the evening. I dreaded coming back to work the next day, but had no choice. When I arrived, she said nothing. Then once all the people who had been there the day before were at their desks, she gathered us together. "Yesterday," she began, "I accused Carl of having made a mistake that cost the theater a significant amount of money. I realized this morning that I was wrong. I realized I was the one who did it. I asked him to do something, later told him I would take care of it, and forgot I'd said that, and ultimately didn't do what needed to be done. I wanted to get you all together to hear this firsthand. You were all there when I accused him, and it's only right that you're all here when I apologize." She then turned to me specifically and said, "I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. I had forgotten I said I'd do it. The mistake was all mine, and the next time I find myself in a situation like that, I will handle it more professionally." She thanked everyone for listening and left the room. You could have knocked me over with a feather. I had never seen an adult be so vulnerable or accountable. I'd never seen anyone bring a group of people who witnessed a dressing down back together to then own their shit and do truly meaningful damage control. She not only saved our personal and professional relationship, she set an example I have never forgotten. If I were to point to one event that put me on the path to becoming the experienced apologizer I am today, it would be that. She taught me many things in that moment, and especially how important it is to triage a conflict before doing or saying a word about it. Although much of what I'm going to say can be applied to work relationships, I'm going to focus mostly on personal relationships. So you felt there's a distance between you and the other person. What now? My first tip is to make sure you're as clear as you possibly can be on the who, what, why, when, where, and how of the matter. We may not have the luxury of picking our bosses, colleagues, or stakeholders, but we do pick our friends. As such, the first thing I focus on is the who part of the equation. As brutal as this may sound, the first thing I ask myself if I'm sensing some distance or feeling someone has pulled away is, does this person bring positive value to my life, or is it time to let go of the relationship? The more value and meaning a relationship brings to my life, the more energy I will invest in it. I will die on the hill of connection every single time if the relationship in question enhances my life. On the other hand, if this person has become a consistent source of strife or disappointment, if the relationship has become one-sided and the energy isn't flowing evenly between us, then I'll evaluate the possibility that life may be giving me an off-ramp to a relationship that no longer suits me. If so, I may leave the distance and take the exit. As important as it is to maintain relationships of meaning in our lives, it is equally valuable to recognize when it's time to let one go, especially if it is out of balance or no longer feeds our spirit. Once I've answered the who question and determined that this person is someone I want to keep in my life, then I'll give some thought to the rest. What do I think happened? When did I first notice the change? Why are they pulling away rather than approaching me? And how or where should I approach them? I don't sit down with a tablet of paper for any of this. This all goes on in the background while I'm working, walking the dog, sharing space with my husband, Jim, making dinner, or driving. I may come up with some ideas on the matter, or I may be stumped. All I may know is that the distance is there. I want to keep this person in my life. I want to understand. And I know if I do nothing, the distance, the wound, will fester and grow. I get my head around what I know of the person, of our relationship, of the distance I'm feeling, and then it's time to reach out to them and acknowledge there is a conflict, so we can begin the work to find out what it is and how to resolve it. How I go about doing this depends on the level of intimacy I have with the person, how close we are physically, and what I know about their comfort level with conflict. I don't always get the last one right, though, especially with a colleague. A strong work persona can present as someone who is comfortable with conflict, but interpersonally, they may not be as comfortable with it as they are professionally. That duality many of us have between our work selves and our personal selves sometimes catches me by surprise. If I can talk to the other person face to face with some level of intimacy, I prefer to do that. I also remind myself it's not about me. It's not about what makes me comfortable. If a face-to-face conversation would make the other person uncomfortable, I'll adapt my approach to better suit my perception of their needs. As much as I hate it, I may text, IM, message, or email them. I use those as last resorts for two reasons. First, because there simply isn't a text-based substitute for eye contact, body language, or tone of voice. Second, because text-based exchanges put the other person in the position of having to imagine my tone of voice. Although I'm writing with inquisitive empathy, given they're already feeling hurt, they may read what I wrote and apply anger or judgment to it. This phenomenon is why text-based exchanges can go sideways quickly. The initial reaching out to the other person to address the distance is so important. Go slow, don't shame, don't threaten, don't scare. The goal is to make the matter better, not worse. Keep reminding yourself this is not about your needs, it's about theirs. Use what you know about them as your guide. Remember, you're in a three-way relationship, and it's not all about you. I had a friend who didn't love conflict and somehow ended up in a career in sales. Conflict in sales is inescapable. She used humor when first reaching out to someone to understand a disconnect she may have been feeling. She'd often ask them, "Are we fighting? Am I winning?" This approach is a great way to get a sense of where the other person may be. It doesn't provide the other person with any context, but it acknowledges your awareness that something has shifted. It also introduces a small amount of humor into the situation. I've used this approach many times. If I think the issue may be complex or the wound more profound, I use a more structured approach. I'll say something like, "I've noticed, fill in the change, since, fill in the timeline, and I want to check in. Did I do or say something to offend you?" I do this because it's concrete, states my specific concern, and provides a timeline, all of which gives the other person context and a framework for their own response. Then comes the hardest part, for me anyway, shutting up and waiting for them to respond. If I'm lucky, I'll get a sincere, "It's not you, it's me." I may even be thanks for noticing that they're going through something, and an apology from them for worrying me. I've gotten answers like, "My partner left me," "My pet died," "I'm struggling with a health issue that I don't want to discuss," or "I'm worried about my job," all of which are somewhat open and shut. Whether or not I lean in any further depends on the circumstances and how close I am to the person. I'll offer support, condolences, reassurances, and move forward. It's rare to get such a quick closure, but I'll take it and proceed from there. I may get the dreaded, "I don't know what you mean" response. I see this response as an immediate red flag. To respond in such a way when I just told them what I'd observed and asked if I'd done something to offend them often means the other person isn't willing or able to discuss the matter. It may also mean that the offense is worse than I thought, and perhaps they're the one choosing to take the off-ramp from our relationship. Given I've already decided at the start that the relationship matters to me, that I want to work through the hurt and repair the wound, I will try again and provide just a little more detail about the change I've noticed in the relationship. They will either reply the same way, say nothing, or perhaps respond with an emotional outpour. Although an emotional outpour may catch me by surprise, at least they opened up and gave me something to work with. Now we have a place to start. If, however, I get a variation of, "I don't know what you mean," or no response at all, I have to acknowledge that for whatever reason, they're choosing to ignore my clearly stated concern regarding the change in the dynamics of our relationship. It's been my experience that in this circumstance, the distance grows and the relationship eventually ends. If the other person can't acknowledge there is a conflict, we cannot, on our own, resolve it. One person can't fix a two-person problem. I am a fan of resolution, and if I can't have that, I at least want closure, but such is life, and we don't always get what we want. No response at all is my least favorite outcome in this process. It took me quite a lot of living to realize and accept that no response is a response, with the caveat, if it is intentional. If I get no response from someone with whom I have a long-standing relationship, I'll wait a few days and try again. People get swamped with competing priorities, and my attempt to connect may not have made it on their priority list at that moment in their life. They may have honestly overlooked or forgotten it. If I do lean in again, I simply ask if they got my message. If they don't respond again, then I've certainly gotten theirs. The silent goodbye. Silence is the hardest response for me. I find it passive-aggressive, unkind, and I hate being left to imagine a reason. It's interesting that one person can cause a conflict, but it definitely takes two to resolve it. If the other person isn't willing to engage, there's simply no path to a meaningful apology. Asking a third time would be aggressive in its own way, and as much as I hate life's loose ends, I leave it at that. Maybe one day the other person will circle back around and the mystery will be solved. It's not outside the realm of possibility, but I'm learning to let go and move on. I find letting go takes practice. If you're listening and you're someone who responds with silence when someone is earnestly trying to connect with you to resolve a wound, that kind of silence can easily turn a small wound into something that can't be healed. I'd invite you to explore why you do that, and what you get out of it. You're getting something out of it, whether you're aware of it or not. Saying nothing at all, or pretending nothing is wrong when given an example, fosters resentment. One thing I've learned from both therapy and life is that resentment is the death of intimacy. The best outcomes after we've acknowledged the distance are that they tell us, yes, something is wrong, or have an emotional outpour. In either event, you have confirmation, information, and something to work through and resolve. But it's too soon to say, I'm sorry. Why? Because if they ask exactly what I'm sorry for, I'd be caught flat-footed. If I can't answer that question, then my apology was premature. At this point, I thank them for acknowledging that there is something wrong, or for sharing whatever it was they shared, and I set up a conversation to find out the bigger picture. Once we've connected, and again, I try to do this outside of text-based messaging if at all possible, I confirm my understanding of the conflict. I may say, "Thank you for sharing why you're upset with me. I want to be sure I understand what I did. Am I right that you're upset because I fill in the blank?" I do my best to put what they said in my own words, while sticking to their point or points. It's a classic active listening technique, but it demonstrates empathy, which helps restore trust. Then, I shut up. They're making themselves vulnerable and sharing that they are feeling hurt, angry, disappointed, betrayed, or whatever it may be, and I have to give them the space to process and reply. I'm not always good at the shutting up part, but I work on it. Jim and I have an egg timer protocol. If he wants to tell me something and doesn't want me to interrupt him, we agree he can break out the kitchen timer, and I have to be quiet until it goes off. So far, he hasn't had to deploy it, but it's a great tool if you need help with mindfulness. We're shutting up. At this point, the other person will either agree with my summary or offer some nuance for accuracy. Sometimes we aren't fully clear on what is bothering us until we have to explain it to another person in terms so clear they understand us. On more than one occasion, going through this process with a friend or Jim has resulted in the other person realizing they were actually upset about something quite different. It wasn't until they heard me say the issue back to them that they realized it. which is why confirming your understanding of the offense is also so important. Finally, we're all on the same page. And yes, getting here took work, which is exactly why I start by asking myself if the relationship is worth it in the first place. The good news is that the time and energy we spend on this process comes back to us in positive ways through improved trust and a deeper bond with the other person. It's energy well spent. Now we talk with one another. The where, when, how of all this may vary, but remember, there is no substitute for seeing someone's face or hearing someone's voice to fully understand their reaction, and that goes both ways. Even if you don't think you're in the wrong, the conversation has to be had. Since this is Apologize 101, for sake of simplicity, you were in the wrong. I'll do a 200-level episode another time. Depending on what caused the rift, this conversation may be absolutely painless. But if the wound is deep, the conversation could put both people in a position of shame, which gets in the way of being open and vulnerable. Shame can also put us on the defensive and make us deflect or negate the other person's point of view. Here's how the conversation could go. Thank them again for letting you know why they added the distance. I'm so glad you felt you could share that with me. Reiterate your understanding. If your conversation happens quickly, this is simple. If there's been some time between setting up the chat and actually having it, it may be worth restating what happened so you're both still on the same page. Find the common ground. Most likely, whatever you did to upset this person will be something that would have also upset you. Own it. I have felt similarly when someone has done that to me. I know how it feels when a friend does what I did. Now that we're all in agreement, now we can move to the apology. First, some don'ts. Don't turn the tables. I can't tell you how often an attempt to resolve a conflict has gone south because the person in the wrong tries to make it about themselves, or tries to come off as the victim, or unleashes a laundry list of items the wounded party has done to them that have nothing to do with the moment at hand. That is not fair negotiating. If we had a problem where the other person did something that hurt us, we need to put a pin in it for now. That's not to say we can't circle back, so long as it's not coming from a tit-for-tat place. It's just, this isn't the time to make it about us. No matter what was done, do not use the word if. I'm sorry if. That approach is one of the most dismissive apologies we could offer. What do you mean if? We've already established it happened, and using if negates the work we just did to acknowledge the conflict. There is no longer doubt. It happened. We did it. We must own it. Don't put the conflict on the other person's reaction to what we did. In other words, there's no saying, I'm sorry, you. I'm sorry, you took it that way. I'm sorry, you felt that way when I. Where the if apology is dismissive and negating, and I'm sorry, you apology deflects any responsibility for our part in things and attempts to place the blame on the other person's reaction to our behavior, to our offense. There is no longer any doubt that we were in the wrong. What happened, happened, and now is our time to own it. Don't joke. Apologizing to someone earnestly is a deeply intimate thing. Our goal is to demonstrate that we see and understand their pain, and we must express our remorse and accountability, or the apology means nothing. Humor at this point in the process would most likely be a deflection in response to some discomfort we're feeling. If you're feeling uncomfortable, sit with it and see if you can figure out what's driving it. Growth comes from discomfort. It's cliché because it's true. And don't expect a simple I'm sorry to be sufficient. A simple I'm sorry is a peanut butter apology we're trying to slather over everything in the hopes of quickly moving on and avoiding any real discussion, any real vulnerability, and usually any real accountability. It shows no genuine remorse and does nothing to validate the other person or the pain we caused. So what do we do? Above all else, be accountable. An apology is meaningless if we don't own what it was that we did. You are absolutely right. I did exactly what you said. And again, shut up and let them process and respond. Be prepared to answer why you did it. We may not have meant to. We may have gotten swept up in a moment. Depending on the offense, we may need to reflect a bit here and get back to the person. We may have done or said something we've been doing or saying for years, and this was the first time anyone ever called us out for it. We can offer an explanation, but keep in mind an explanation as to what or why we did something is not actually an apology. It's exposition and nothing more. Our explanation also should not be a veiled attempt to justify our behavior. The explanation simply allows us to share what was going on for us at the time of the offense, period. Nothing we say at this time is inherently right or wrong. It's simply an honest statement as to what drove our bus to do what we did. If we agree with the wounded party's assessment, if we can see how what we did to them could indeed be hurtful, then it's a pretty cut and dry matter. If we don't agree we're in the wrong, that's more complex, and like I said, I'll do that in a future episode. But for the purposes of this episode, we're going to assume we agree. Now we're ready to offer the apology. There's some room for juggling this about a bit based on the situation, but all three of these elements need to be present. 1. We must actually say the words "I'm sorry," acknowledge the cost of our behavior to the other person, and state specifically what it is we're sorry for. The person we're apologizing to needs to be seen, heard, and validated. Be sure they understand we realize the impact our actions had on them. 2. We must state that we will not do it again. Do not use the word try. There's a saying in therapy, trying is lying. Only time and changed behavior will allow us to regain this person's trust and confidence. Relationships always come down to behavior, behavior, behavior. Our actions are what define us, not our words. 3. Make amends. What my former boss did, calling everyone together and apologizing to me, is an excellent example of making amends. It doesn't need to be grandiose, and depends on the severity of the offense. If we're at a loss for what making amends looks like, because this is not something all of us do in our everyday lives, ask the other person how we can make things right. Chances are they may already have something in mind. We also need to be prepared for the fact that there may not be a way to make things right, depending on the severity of the offense. Our job at this point is to listen and to be accountable for our actions. While offering our apology, we may feel uncomfortable. There may be awkward silences. Remember the power and importance of silence and allow for it. Provide the space for the other person to take in and process our words. The best outcome may be that we made the attempt to clear the air by being accountable for our actions. Hopefully, we learned something about ourselves that we won't repeat. Either way, we need to be open to their response and reaction. Their response may range from understanding to continued frustration or even anger. Unfortunately, apologizing to someone is not a golden ticket to forgiveness, but that doesn't diminish the value in apologizing. At the start of the episode, I said we offer apologies, because that's really what we're doing. We're offering the person we hurt something of ourselves, and they will either accept it or reject it. Sometimes our apology may need to be workshopped a bit until we find the way to convey it such that the other person takes it in. It's not always a guarantee, but in my experience, emotionally intact people are tremendously forgiving when met with a sincere apology that validates their position and reaction. We can be sure of one thing: they will look to our future behavior to inform the sincerity of our apology. It simply can't be said enough. Behavior, behavior, behavior paints the most accurate picture of someone's character and intentions. We have to be brave and responsible enough to apologize and try to make amends. If we avoid the process of apologizing for our transgressions, we create for ourselves a reputation that can make our relationships less meaningful. We could even limit our careers. But when we are accountable, when we are empathetic, when we own up to our transgressions, big and small, intentional or accidental, when we are decent to the people around us, we create the space for deep trust and respect. And that is the value in apology. Epilogue. I want to acknowledge that for many men, being vulnerable with or to someone can feel emasculating. As a gay man, I spent many years trying to define what masculinity meant for me. Growing up, I had no role models for what vulnerability in boys or men looked like. Boys and men simply weren't, and aren't, socialized to incorporate vulnerability as a tenet of masculinity, which is something I think desperately needs to be addressed in American culture. I was raised and taught by society that to be masculine was to be strong, silent, loud, aggressive, stoic, no mixed messages there, but never vulnerable. Vulnerability was weakness. Empathy was weakness. Apologizing to someone was an act of weakness. My father made it clear to me from an early age that he didn't feel I was masculine enough. He never apologized to me or anyone in the family for anything he ever did. Cruelty, threats, and lies were his core behaviors. My brother followed our father's example. My maternal grandfather wasn't cruel. He ruled through silence, a direct stare, the occasional flick on the forehead with a thimble-covered finger, and emotional distance. On the other hand, my uncle offered an example of a self-possessed kind of masculinity. He loved to laugh, would take us to amusement parks and ride the rides with us. He set limits and boundaries with us, but never raised his voice or threatened us with violence to do so. He was the odd man out in our family, and I only got to share space with him a week or two each year, and only up until my grandmother sold the house after my grandfather died. To figure out what masculinity meant to me, I looked to the world around me, sifted through what I learned in life and through therapy, and eventually landed on this as my personal definition of masculinity. To be a man is to be a decent, accountable human being. Once I landed on that, any distinction between masculinity and femininity became irrelevant. Just be a decent person and accountable for your actions. Accountability is the core driver behind any apology.